Let's bring in our panel now. Former Liberal advisor David Gazard from DPG Advisory and former Labor advisor Eamon Fitzpatrick, now with Fitzpatrick Advisory. Gentlemen, appreciate your time as always. Eamon, this detail, as reported by Andrew Clennell this afternoon, the caps put to the states by the federal government. Are you surprised there's not compensation being offered at this stage by the feds to the states in terms of those the coal royalties particularly?
Well, thanks, Kieran, and good afternoon. Look, it is an interesting question. I think there's been a view around some of the windfall profits anyway in terms of how the states have been faring. But I think it comes down to what is in the national interest, the short-term national interest. Yes, the states are the states, but we're all part of the great democracy that is Australia. And the number one priority right now is making sure we get some action on power prices. So I think obviously there'll be ongoing dialogue between the PM and those premiers. But in terms of caps and a compensation for them at this stage, I think there's an argument to say, well, they've been doing pretty well. And is there some action we can take further into next year that might level some of that out?
David Gazard, do you get the sense there'll be a grand bargain struck at the National Cabinet on Friday?
Well, there might have to be. Well done, Anthony Albanese, for trying to cost shift the other way. We've seen for years and years and years the states make their problems the feds, and the Prime Minister has said to the states, I've got a problem on energy pricing and you're going to foot the bill. So whether he can pull off that audacious move remains to be seen. Good luck to him for trying. The one thing I'd say, though, on capping power prices, it's only one piece of the puzzle, which is there's got a lot of moving parts, this equation, and capping wholesale gas prices doesn't necessarily mean that the gas companies will supply it into the domestic market when the price they can get overseas is much higher. So if the government's going to move in that area and cap the wholesale rate, they also need to make sure that the gas companies can't continue to sell it all offshore. There's got to be corresponding legislation that would require them to put some in or reserve some for the domestic market.
You would think, Eamon, that there'd be at least political support at this time for an intervention like this. In years gone by, as you would recall, sometimes when there have been interventions in the resources space, there's been a lot of pushback and the politics hasn't always been in favour. But you'd think the political mood would be in favour of such an intervention right now, given how much people are struggling and set to struggle even further next year when it comes to cost of living and power bills.
Yeah, Kieran, that's exactly it. I mean, surprise, surprise, Labor Prime Minister backs working families against big resources companies with, unlimited profits. I mean, that's exactly what's happened. I think to some degree, some of these, the resources sector, has become a victim of its own success now. And I think we've seen a few cases where they've cried poor previously, the lived experience is far from that. And we've got a healthy resources sector and there's a lot going on. But the people who need help the most right now are the ones that Anthony Albanese is getting right behind, and that's working families and businesses who are having to cope with these rising power prices.
Another rate rise this week as well, David Gazard. So the difficulties for the household budget seem to mount almost by the week right now. And this looms part of the energy story as well, but this is the big challenge for Anthony Albanese to navigate into 2023.
This is a huge economic challenge, and it's only going to become worse as we come into the new year because many of the fixed rate loans that people have with their mortgages come off and they go back onto variable rates. So it is entirely possible that increases in power prices will be more than quadrupled by higher mortgage interest rates for many people that are coming off those fixed rates. So we've seen the economy grow in the latest set of data, but discretionary spending, which has really buoyed the economy up until now, will take a beating as people start to try to pay for higher power prices. So power prices and for mortgage rates and other cost of living expenses they have. So I would say that would be probably the biggest challenge the Albanese government faces going into 2023.
The RBA governor, Eamon, Phil Lowe, has copped an absolute battering from various analysts, economists, saying that it's too late to act and then not fast enough. Really, so much for the government comes down to whether or not that governor can help orchestrate a soft landing next year from this inflationary cycle.
Yep, 100%. And, it has got to be one of the hardest gigs in the business. But having said that, they haven't quite gotten all those calls right. And I think there's a little bit of validity to some criticism. People were making buying decisions based on what they were being told. But having said all that, it doesn't matter whether you're in Australia or anywhere else in the world. So we are dealing very challenging circumstances. We're still faring better than most. David's right. The challenge is next year is that combination of mortgages and power prices. And of course, we still have to do something about wages as well. Wages lifting. So, it is a rocky path ahead, but you'd rather go into it with a government that's got people first on its list and doing what it can to try and make life better for everybody.
Yeah, and David Gazard for the government, as we said, the Energy Minister's meeting tomorrow, National Cabinet on Friday, and that's where the focus will be. An interesting legacy, isn't it, really, from the pandemic years? But National Cabinet in that model, in that setting, continues, David.
Yeah, look, it's something that helped us through the pandemic, no doubt, even though there were obvious tensions. Energy, like health, is one of those regulatory matters that if you went back to the start of Federation, you wouldn't do it the way they did it. So it's regulated both state and federal level, which makes things hellishly complex. Most of the supply issues are actually governed by the states. So, it is a really, really difficult thing to do when both levels of government make revenue out of exploiting various resources, but no one has ultimate say over who regulates the price. So, not to mention the difficulty of legally binding contracts that these companies have entered into with suppliers and buyers over the course of the last few years that obviously stand. So it is really, really complex. I wish the government well in trying to unpick the Gordian knot that covers the regulatory structures governing everything.
Diabolical, I think is the word. David Gazard, Eamon Fitzpatrick, gents, I'll see you next week. Thanks.